Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Chris, and this is Business by the Books.
Hi, welcome to Business by the Books, where we believe that leaders are readers. So if you are not reading, you are not leading. This is episode 17, and this week we are covering The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, and this was published in 2000. Yeah, you really like Malcolm Gladwell.
I do.
You've kind of
I think I've read all of his books.
Yeah.
It's entertaining because he tells stories, but he has this genius ability just to connect trends and those kind of things. And I think you're doing a little research before we got started.
I typically try to look up a little bit about the author before we do these podcasts, so I understand a little bit of the context of who they are. It gives me an appreciation for who they are. And so with Malcolm Gladwell, something that just really I loved was that he started at the New Yorker. I'm reading this off of Wikipedia. But he started at the New Yorker in 1996, and he wanted to mine current academic research for insights, theories, direction, or inspiration. And his first assignment was actually a piece about fashion. Instead of writing about high-class fashion, Gladwell opted to write a piece about a man who manufactured T-shirts. And he said, this is a quote from him directly, "It was much more interesting to write a piece about someone who made a T-shirt for $8 than it was to write a piece about a dress that costs $100,000. I mean, you or I could make a dress for $100,000, but to make a T-shirt for $8, that's much tougher." And I love that because it takes away the spotlight on something that may be very rare, but is also not that difficult, to something that...
And people can't relate to that. I mean, how many people who are going to buy a $100,000 dress?
Exactly. And then, just covering this gentleman who is making T-shirts. I'm literally wearing a T-shirt right now. It's like I own 20 T-shirts, And so this concept of it's so much harder to run a business and be really practical in that sense. So I already appreciate him so much. But within the context for The Tipping Point, which he actually got, let me read. I think he got a $1 million advance to write this book.
Wow.
This was originally it was an article written in 1996 for the New Yorker, and the other one that he's also famous for is The Cool Hunt. And so he wrote those, and he got a $1 million advance to write a book about the tipping point.
You've arrived as an author when you get $1 million before you even write the book.
Exactly. So with that, you have obviously read the book. I have not. So what is the book about?
So as the name implies, the tipping point is that in epidemics, which we're kind of in the middle of with COVID or
very
pandemic.
Perfectly timed.
Yeah, perfectly timed. And it was kind of funny kind of preparing for this. It's like, hey, this is amazing. And I read this book, probably I think in 2009, so a little over a decade ago. But he talks about in society, in the medical community, in innovation and trends and fashion. He actually opens up with a story on the Hush Puppies. It seems like there's this unforeseen set of circumstances that lead to these massive movements that take place. And so what Gladwell does, and he is probably one of the best writers I've ever seen, who really drills down. He's more than just a writer. He's more than just writing about case studies. He's looking to connect the dots. And so I'm a big fan of his. And so when I read a book like this, for me, in the oil and gas industry, I'm looking for how do you take new technologies and get them adopted. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this podcast is what are some things that he pulls out. And so anyway, we'll talk about some of the case studies that he had mentioned. And I just think it's an amazing process because it's very frustrating in life and business when people don't buy into your ideas. But man, when people do, and there's a certain set, and we'll talk about that, there's a certain set of people that are influencers. And when they go out and spread the message, it's like wildfire.
Wow. Yeah. So sweet. All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's
talk about one of the stories. And so everybody knows about Paul Revere. So what did Paul Revere do? Rode a horse.
The British are coming.
Exactly.
Yes.
One if by land, two if by sea, right?
Yes, yep.
So he tells the story, and once again, this is one of these things, most American school kids probably can tell you a little bit about this story, but here's the story behind the story, okay? And he said, in the afternoon of April 18th, 1775, a young boy who worked on a livery stable in Boston overheard one British Army officer say to another something about hell to pay tomorrow. The stable boy ran with the news to Boston's North End to the home of a silversmith named Paul Revere. Revere listened gravely. This was not the first rumor to come that way that day. Earlier, he had also been told of an unusual number of British officers gathering on Boston's Long Wharf, talking in low tones. And so, obviously, the part we know about history is that Paul Revere got on a horse, and he rode, and he told everybody about it. And it was like wildfire, and then the Americans were able to respond. And in Concord the next day, the British were confronted and soundly beaten by the colonial militia. From that exchange, that war eventually became known as the American Revolution. So that's the story that we all know about, okay? But here's the interesting thing was, he said, in the case of Paul Revere's ride, the answer to this seems easy. Revere was carrying a sensational piece of news. The British were coming. But if you look closely at the events of that evening, that explanation doesn't solve the riddle easier. Why did people listen to Revere is the point. At the same time that Revere began his ride north and west of Boston, a fellow revolutionary, a tanner by the name of William Dawes, set out on the same urgent errand, working his way to Lexington via the towns west of Boston. He was carrying the identical message through just as many towns over just as many miles as Paul Revere. But Dawes' ride didn't set the countryside afire. The local militia leaders weren't alerted. In fact, so few men from one of the main towns he rode through, Waltham, fought the following day that some subsequent historians concluded that it must have been a strongly pro-British community. It wasn't. The people of Waltham just didn't find out that the British were coming until it was too late. The answer is that the success of any kind of social epidemic is heavily dependent on the involvement of people with a particular and rare set of social gifts. Revere's news tipped, and Dawes didn't because of the differences of the two men.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
That's really interesting.
But this book is just full of stories like that you're just like, okay, well, there's this neat little story. And all of a sudden, I mean, it brings history to life, right? All of a sudden, that story's a lot more interesting because what made Paul Revere was he was socially connected. He had relationships with people. And so that's the super key in all this, is to achieve a tipping point, you got to get the right message to the right people, and then things fall in place.
Right people, right place, right time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Cool.
It is. Isn't that a neat story?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'd never heard of the tanner, Mr. Dawes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Apparently you're not the only one.
Yep. Oopsies. Sweet. Awesome. Well, within the book, obviously it's kind of continuing to talk about, I mean, Paul Revere isn't the only story that's told in this book.
Right,
so what are some others, or maybe some key parts to this book that really stood out to you?
So I'll just kind of read you what I wrote. It said, like few modern day authors, Malcolm Gladwell has the ability to take seemingly random events and establish connected trends that help us understand how we can influence the world around us. With multiple case studies, Gladwell identifies the 3 rules of tipping point based on observations from epidemics. So the first is the law of the few, the second is the stickiness factor, and then there's the power of context. They provide us with direction for how to go about reaching a tipping point. So that's from page 29. So one of the things that everybody hears about this is called the 80-20 principle. And we talk about it in church, we talk about it in business, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And so the key is, anytime you're trying to do something, is if you can motivate those 20 people and you can connect with them, then they're going to wind up, there's a multiplying, there's a leverage effect that if you wind up trying to have the message to everybody else, then it just gets watered down. And to be honest with you, if you focus on everybody, you may hit the 80%, but you miss the 20% that you're really trying to reach. And so I think when you talk about trying to get things caught, it's really important. And social media is interesting, Ashley, and you know a lot more about that than I do, but social media gives you the ability to connect with people that 20 years ago you never could have connected with.
Absolutely.
And so the ability to create kind of these pandemic experiences with social media it's amazing.
Well, it's crazy just thinking about both good and bad stories, how fast they travel. I mean, the one that obviously comes to mind is the case of George Floyd, of Mr. Floyd and his death, and how quickly that spread across the internet and therefore across the country. And it was just so interesting to see in the midst of all of this craziness. Not, there's obviously the physical aspect of the pandemic and the stuff that we're dealing with right now, but also the social issues and how it really has become a wildfire that's really spread across this entire country so
and part
quickly.
of it too is it's not just that people are getting information, and that's important, but that people are acting on that information, right?
Exactly.
And so that's, probably 20 years ago, people would get information through TV and all those kind of things, but now very quickly people are acting on things within hours, and it's not even days or weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I am so thankful to not be in the news industry, because I feel like that could be so overwhelming, because we as consumers are already bombarded with so much information, but being on that side of it where it's your responsibility to get it out, and the second that you have a new piece
you
of
have to dispel all that information. What is the stuff that you want to get? And then unfortunately, the stuff gets out. It's the stuff that starts the wildfire.
Exactly.
It's not sometimes it's the mayhem that gets people excited and motivated, and so that's kind of what sells, as opposed to, I'd really prefer that we hear good things about, okay, what are some good things that people are doing?
Because there's plenty of good things, but we like to highlight the bad stuff.
I would love to have a TV station to just focus on good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But maybe apparently we need a tipping point.
John Krasinski from The Office, he played Jim, and so he actually has a YouTube channel, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it's the whole channel is only about good news, and it's just so wholesome and so sweet, and we need more of that, because we already, and within every single one of us there is darkness and there is sad things, and so I think there needs to be more focus on the beauty of this world rather than the darkness, because we all have it.
Well, and the weird thing is, I think everybody would like that, but for some reason we watch the bad stuff.
I know, it's kind of this idea of like, well, why do I watch TV shows about serial killers? Like, why would I watch that? But it's just so like enticing.
Tiger King.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Ooh, Tiger King. That's perfect. Yes, I've already. Okay, sorry. Like, admission, I've watched that 3 full times.
Have you really?
Yes, I have.
And you actually got me to watch it.
And I did get you to watch it once. Only once, though.
And that once was enough.
It should have been enough for me.
Shows that make you feel good about yourself.
Yeah,
is that what that is?
That's what it is. That's why we watch Hoarders. That's why we watch Tiger King. That's why we watch all of that. So, anyways, continue on.
Yep.
So, within this book, you obviously, it's in your top 50. You really do like it, and you've talked very highly of Malcolm Gladwell. So, within this book specifically, what was your favorite part?
So, I think there's a couple things. One is, and I often joke that, is like, I'm, as an engineer, I've got stuff I get excited about, but if I was to talk about for 20 minutes, advances in composite repair technology, I don't think many people are overly excited about that. Now, I can name probably 50 who would be, but, not the thousands that we're trying to reach with this message.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like about it, reading a book like this, is it gives you a lot of stories to visit with people about. So when you go to dinner, that you're entertaining, you got things to talk about. So that's a kind of a plug for the book. But one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and even with our business, is like, last year we worked for 43 companies and 28 of them were technology companies. And every technology company has some kind of innovation. And the American dream is to get people excited about that and to grow your business. And so the ultimate idea would be that you have some idea for, some kind of technology, like, was it the ring guy? He was on Shark Tank, and they actually, nobody gave him money.
Which is so funny.
Which is crazy. And then I think, did he sell for $1 billion
Something like that.
Amazon?
I think it was to Amazon.
So that's like the American dream. So it's a guy who's good at science and good at math. We'll plug for those who have kids, get them doing math and science, because we need more people that do that. And he was forward thinking, and then he lived the American dream. Yeah. But something happened. There was a tipping point that people wanted to do that. So Gladwell probably could have a chapter on that. So to me, there's this concept called the diffusion model, and we're also going to talk about it in one of Simon Sinek's books about this diffusion model. And so basically, if you take society, and it's actually a bell curve, and people fall in 5 groups, and in another podcast we'll give percentages, but there's a small percentage, and they're called the innovators. And I think if my numbers are right, it's like 2.5%. So out of 100 people, you got somewhere between 2 and 3 people that they just, as Kennedy said, we need people who see things that never were. They just, they see the unseen. And then the second group, and I think it was like 13.5%, they were the early adopters. And so they're what Gladwell calls, they're the opinion leaders. Okay, so if you add those 2 groups of people up, it's a little bit less than 20%, so our 80-20 rule. So if in you have a technology and you can find that 20% of people and you get them excited about what you're doing, then they spread the message to the next group, and it's the early majority. And I think that was like roughly 35%. So once you start doing stuff like that, so think about like cell phones. And so, I'm not, at least in terms of technology, I'm probably not an early adopter. I'm probably an early majority. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
now, when it comes to, it's funny though, when it comes to business, I don't know, maybe in the middle.
Business,
okay?
maybe.
Business on the front end, but part of it's the finances.
Yeah.
It's like, like I've got an old phone, it works fine. I'm not trying to solve the world's problems. I'm just trying to check text, email, and call people. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But you and your siblings,
we got the social media.
Seem to think it's really important to have the latest and greatest.
Yeah, we got all of it.
But my guess is once you start having to pay for the latest and greatest, or Matt does, that y'all gonna start. Matt will bring balance to that. Okay. Yeah, so then the last two groups are the late majority or the later majority, and they are deliberate and skeptical. And so they're roughly 30-40% of the population, and then the laggards are the fifth group. And what Gladwell says is they have no urgent reason to change.
Yeah.
So for me and us working with like 28 technology companies last year, rereading this book and prepping for this podcast, are there some practical things I can pull out from this book that can help me in working with the technology companies? Is like, let's say you've got a great repair technology or you have a great inspection technology. How do we get this message out and find the influencer? And I'd be tempted to mention some names. I've got 5 or 6 friends who work in the oil industry, and they are definitely on the early adopter and the innovator stage, and they're the guys I go see. I'll say, hey, this is some technology that we've got, and if they get excited about it, it is amazing how things get adopted. So, maybe my challenge to you is, number one, is read the book, but also spend some time thinking about in this diffusion model, which of the 5 groups, maybe we can make up a test.
Oh man, I'll let you do that. I'll just get it. I'll get it out to the.
We could call it the 5
masses.
diffusers.
Oh,
so the 5 voices.
Well, I'm gonna let you do that. Take care of that, and I'll just put it out on social media.
But the challenge is, and Gladwell talks about this, is that you've got to find those people who are the connectors, and they're the people who know people, and they have this influence. And it's funny. It's not something that's intentional. It's just something through their personality that they draw people in, and they are people of influence. And so, I think there's a couple things. If you have a company, you try to find those people, but also strategically, is it possible for you to become a person, an influencer, by doing some intentional things? And it doesn't happen like that, but over a given period of time, if you're strategic and probably tactical to some degree, that you can become a person like that.
Yeah. So would you say within and you kind of have already talked about the application, but I just want to clarify, within the context of the innovators and stuff, are you saying that it is extremely important that you know who those people are that you reach out to? Yeah.
Because it can be very frustrating. I have several clients that they've got great technology. I know it's good because I've tested it and I'm confident that it works, but they just can't seem to get connected to the right people. And so, it's frustrating, and people literally go out of business because they don't find those people. And you hate to be too emotional about it, but people's dreams are dashed because of the inability to connect to the connector and the influencer.
Yeah. And how would you say, coming from a college student perspective, where I'm still early in my career and my beginnings, how do you find those people, and how do you get to know those people and develop connections with them?
I think some of it is to look for traits. We've talked about we talk a lot about personality types around here.
Yeah.
And how I like the DISC test, because being an Aggie, I like to keep it 4.
Yeah. And
we'll just talk about the animals. So you got the lion, you got the otter, you got the beaver, and then you have the golden retriever. Okay. And so you kind of learn when you meet people that people are a combination of those 4. It's the same thing when you go out and meet people, and probably the 5 voices is the best, best context to think about, is that you want to look for people who are connectors, and you can tell who they are. Like I go to a lot of conferences and I go to a lot of meetings, and they're the people that are standing around, people are visiting with them. Okay. They're also the people that speak up in meetings. And as I said, I've got 2 or 3 folks that fall in that camp, and they're the go-to people, and they are widely seen as the go-to people. And I think there's a certain amount of stature that they have because they're the go-to person, and they innovate and then they help the innovators innovate. So it's super important, and I think it's important for you to be able to develop the ability to identify those characteristics in people.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweet. Awesome. Any other thoughts on this book?
Yeah, so kind of my last parting comment, and I wrote is, as a society, we need to harness the power of adopting innovative ideas, products, and concepts. Our ability to thrive depends on it. The application and understanding of the thoughts in this book can significantly enhance the ability of thought leaders to be heard. And, it's important if we're going to continue to advance as a society. And, especially, this is we're talking primarily to those in the United States. If we're going to stay competitive from a worldwide standpoint, we need to be coming up with innovative things, but we also need to get those concepts and ideas adopted so that they continue to grow. And if we don't do a good job communicating, and we're just a bunch of smart people sitting around developing things, but if we don't get them in the hands of people that can use them, it's equivalent to having a book and not reading it.
Oops. Me? Question mark?
That wasn't meant to be personal.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Well, it was. Sweet. No, well, that's really informative, and I really like that. And I think that we're in a time, especially in our country, in the midst of, and I see everything oftentimes because I'm not in the technology and industrial world. I see a lot of things from a societal perspective. Just, applying these concepts to the same way to society. We're in a place right now where our country is hurting, and I think that
it's crazy. It's amazing we're doing this at this particular period of time.
It is really interesting, and I think we have in a lot of ways reached a tipping point, in a lot of negative ways and in a lot of positive ways. I think that our nation has reached the tipping point, has come to a head where we're having to make decisions, personal decisions, and look at our society and really recognize what do we actually want to stand for? What do we want to do?
We're kind of off base a little bit, but this is an incredible time to engage people in meaningful conversations.
Yeah,
I'm sitting here looking, we're in our game room, and I'm looking at one of our video games, and we had a guy come today to come out and work. And he said, we sat here for 15 or 20 minutes, and we talked about really meaningful things, but it all started talking about kind of what he thought about COVID and where things are going. And we had a great discussion that I'm not sure a year ago I could have had that. So, my encouragement, if you're watching this, is use this as an opportunity to have a positive impact and meaningful discussion, because people are hurting. This guy had a business, and we're talking about that. It's a great opportunity if you're an optimist and a connector to really have a great impact on people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweet. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. If you end up picking up this book or reading any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, are we covering another one?
I think so.
Yep. Okay, I think we're covering The Outliers.
Yep.
Is that right?
We
yeah,
for sure.
We got it. Okay, I know the titles, I just don't know the content. So, so we're also going to be covering that book later on. But if you end up reading this book, reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts and your experiences with this book or any of the other books that we've talked about in our other episodes. You can reach out to us at businessbythebookspodcast@gmail.com. You can check out our website, businessbythebooks.com. We're on Instagram, Business by the Books, and also on YouTube, Business by the Books. So you can find us anywhere on there. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to any of those platforms. That way you're getting all of the latest episodes and content that we're pushing out. Want to close us out?
I do.
Cool.
I do. Leaders are readers, and if you're not reading, you're not leading.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.